Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Actionable Truth Podcast. I'm Michael Ginsburg. In this episode, we're going to discuss the very recent news, or at least at the time of recording, about Odysee and its new monetization model, which also ties in directly with the new blockchain that they're going to be running on, and what the implications of this could be for independent journalists, creators, and freedom lovers in general, especially in this area of increasingly more aggressive censorship across more centralized platforms, including those who promote themselves as havens of free speech like Twitter, or X as it's called now. This episode is recorded as a live stream, and if you're listening to the audio version, I encourage you to check the video recording on Rumble, Odysee, and Substack. Substack is also the only place you will find the show notes. The fact this is a live stream means that this episode will be more interactive, hopefully, compared to one that is pre-recorded. And I'd love to have your comments throughout. You can interact with the live stream through the chat window wherever you're watching it. But if you would like to comment or your comment or question to be displayed during this live stream, please go to the URL livestream.actionabletruth.media. This is where I'll actually be able to pick your comments from and actually display them in the live stream itself. There's no need to sign up or provide any email address. Just choose whatever name you want to go with, and you can enter your question or comment. All right, so now that we're done with the admin, let's get on with the show, as they say. My guest today is Gabriel of the Libre Solutions Network, who is extremely knowledgeable in the various aspects of how we can use online tools and services effectively in order to support freedom, and especially freedom of speech. And I also want to give credit to Gabriel for kind of introducing me to two concepts that I was actually one concept and one tool that I kind of heard of before, but never really dug deep into before. And that's the Fediverse and ActivityPub. So that's this concept of the federated web, which I kind of heard of, but never really dug deep until I heard Gabriel talk about. And another one is a podcast player actually called AntennaPod. So I've never heard of it until I think Gabriel mentioned that in one of his posts. And given I've been using it now for close to a year, this is definitely an example of an open source tool that is can literally wipe the floor with any of its commercial competitors as far as features, as far as usability, as far as how portable it is, how you can transfer your stuff across. So kudos to that, Gabriel. Yeah, welcome to the Actionable Truth podcast. I guess I've given a short spiel about who you are and what you do, but you mind explaining a bit more about your background, what you do, and even more importantly, why you do what you do?
Thank you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I run my passion multimedia project called the Libre Solutions Network. It is a website and a Substack, but also a PeerTube channel. I really do try to dabble in decentralized media as a whole, including the Fediverse, which you mentioned. And yeah, I love AntennaPod. It's honestly fantastic. If you are using an Android device, this is the best way to engage with decentralized media over RSS.
100%.
And to me, the Libre Solutions Network is fundamentally about trying to get people to think about how we can engage in building a better digital future. Privacy, surveillance, and censorship are all important things to think about. But the fact of the matter is, I think there's a lot of opportunity in thinking about what we can do today to build a better digital future. And I think the bar for making significant progress is way lower than people think, but we do need to be very serious. So I am very optimistic about the potential, but I think we also need to have some skepticism to ground ourselves and make sure we're not being taken advantage of fundamentally. And that's something that's very near and dear to how I talk about many different projects. Anything I cover, I really am motivated by trying to make sure that the public is that we as technologists are stewarding technology for them fundamentally, not weaponizing it against the public, which seems to be the motivation behind all kinds of different forces in this space.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. I agree basically with everything you said. I mean, we have a responsibility, I think, not just as technologists, but also as people who can also explain, I guess, fairly complex technical concepts in layman terms. So not just geek out with the hardcore technical stuff, but actually make it accessible for people. I think we have a responsibility to use that ability that we have in order to help people understand what is actually happening, because it is a very complex space and it's something that is changing very rapidly, with AI, with all the other stuff that is kind of creeping with the technocracy. So I think it's a very timely discussion, not just because of, I guess, what's happening with Odysee, but also how it ties into the bigger picture of blockchain, of AI, of censorship online, and stuff like that. So I guess, like, now that we've already touched on Odysee, I think for the benefit of people who don't really know what this is and not familiar with the platform, uh, um, can you maybe do like a quick intro of what Odysee is, and also in a few sentences, what is the current state of the platform? Obviously, we'll get into a lot more details as we progress, but just for the people who've never heard of Odysee before.
My quick summary would be the Odysee started as a library, which was a attempt to create a decentralized media ecosystem over a blockchain cryptocurrency project where people would upload their files and they could share all kinds of different media, whatever they create, and that would allow people to profit off whatever they create because people could tip in the native currency. Of course, running new blockchain project is kind of hard for people who aren't particularly tech savvy. So there was a migration from the desktop client for library to a news system, which was Odysee, which was kind of a centralized web front end. So anybody who browses the ordinary web could find Odysee and then interact with the library ecosystem. Eventually, what happened was there was a Security and Exchange Commission lawsuit against Library, the incorporation handling the whole project, for how they used their token and basically saying it was securities. And so they got hit with a big fine and they had to restructure things. And so now they're taking on this ambitious new direction, trying to build a decentralized media ecosystem built on Arweave. And Michael and I have talked about this a little bit before, but now that there's a little bit more information coming out, we're doing what we can to delve into the details and at least share what we think of it so far.
Cool, excellent. All right, so I guess let's start with. I mean, I can run through that story because I think it's important. So I think it was at the beginning of this year, or maybe it was February. I'm not sure. So Odysee, since it started, they had an integration with Stripe for fiat payments, like, sponsorships, tipping. I think memberships in channels, stuff like that. So similar to what you have on YouTube, I guess, what you have on Rumble, and it worked basically the same. Now, at the beginning of this year, they had a big falling out with Stripe because basically Stripe approached them and said, "Look, we want you to start collecting a lot more information, including identity documents from your creators, especially if they post in certain categories, because it's becoming a risk for us," and blah blah blah. The usual spiel that you would get from Stripe. And Odysee, to their credit, straight away said, "No, not doing it. Sorry." Okay, so basically what happened after that was Stripe said, "Okay, well, if you're not going to do that, then we can't service you." And again, Odysee, to their credit, I have to say they definitely deserve credit for that. They said, "Okay, see ya." And that's basically what happened. And Odysee preemptively, they went, even before Stripe kind of deplatformed them, they went and removed Stripe completely. Like, they removed the Stripe integration. All the components that Stripe had within their platform were basically removed. And interestingly enough, at the same time, they also killed all ads. So they had ads, display ads. I think they had ads in the videos themselves. They killed both of these, which obviously meant that, like, their monetization model was completely like turned on its head. At the same time that the blockchain that they were running on obviously had major issues as well. So that was basically what happened, right? So that's the past. Let's now move into the present and, I guess, discuss the new blockchain that they're using, and I guess the new monetization model that's going to be derived from that.
So the big thing is that Odysee as a platform is trying to really give creators power to have an audience, really make money off it so that we can have free speech, not just as far as what you're able to say, but what you're also able to sustain, because it does cost money to produce content, to do research, all these things. And so it is very hard when you have either the payment processors in Stripe's case, or you have other institutions kind of leaning, for instance, ad tech has the same financial demonetization problems as well. It is important to find other solutions so that independent voices can actually stay independent. And this is a very thorny and tricky issue because you're kind of trying to deal with what is effectively a very hostile financial ecosystem. And blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies are one way of trying to break free from that. And we'll see how this all goes. But fundamentally, so Odyssey is moving to storing content, at least presumably based off their announcements, that it's going to be on Arweave. Now, Arweave is a token for permanent data storage. They want a permanent web so that your videos or your content, your music, whatever you're creating, can't be taken down. You are paying upfront to upload this content and it will stay there presumably forever, but they guarantee 200 years. And then what Odysee is trying to do is build an ecosystem around this to really add rich tooling for creators so that they probably don't have to be terribly technical to use this system, because all cryptocurrency projects in their early phase are pretty hard for non-technical users to use. And so they've done a lot of interesting things in this ecosystem to try to smooth that over, but it all has trade-offs.
All right, great. So I guess to understand, before we move to a little bit more detail into some of the monetization and consensus and all that sort of stuff, I guess from your perspective, what are the main differences between Arweave, right, and library that they had before, because they were kind of both trying to do the same thing, like permanent storage on the web. And also, I guess, similar projects like, I don't know, like IPFS, like other decentralized, I guess, crypto-based storage projects or storage chains.
Right, because decentralizing file storage or even other similar tasks is not an easy thing to do. One of the biggest problems with creating a decentralized storage system is how do you incentivize people to honestly keep files on their computers? How do you really attract enough investment for people to spend the time to really work on storing all this information that on some level may or may not be useless to them? And so IPFS, which is a interesting option in this space, doesn't really have a system for handling this. So Arweave can be seen as a direct improvement over IPFS because IPFS doesn't necessarily have that mechanism to encourage other people to store your content. Now, to be fair, in the meritocratic sense, maybe people just want to share content that they like. Maybe that's enough for some circumstances, but it may not be good for all circumstances. And so there was another project, Filecoin, that also tried to solve this. I don't know what the status of Filecoin is now. I presume it's somewhat defunct because this does seem to be the new hotness as far as solving this particular problem. And how Arweave kind of solves this is that it has a consensus algorithm called proof of access. So that means that when you are running this ecosystem as a node, not necessarily as a user, but as somebody who is trying to support this decentralized network, you have to store files. And also your system has to prove that it can actually give access to these files and data and whatever is being stored on there at the moment. And so this allows you to get tokens in that system. The challenge with all this is that that is a very expensive thing to do. You're going to need some kind of technical skill to be a node operator here. You're going to need the ability to maintain your hardware, and you're going to need the know-how to keep everything up and running. And so the question is that worth it to the node operators? And they'll be paid in this token. The token can go up in value. Maybe it'll go up in value and lots of people want to participate, or it could go down. And so the details around the token are really important to discuss because it does create the entire economic foundation for this project.
Okay, so we'll definitely discuss the details of the token, and it's very confusing because there's multiple ones, and the native wallet supports some stuff that I don't quite understand what some of these tokens are. But I guess before we move into that, just in terms of costs, and let's talk about in fiat terms now. I mean, how does Arweave, something like Arweave, okay, compared to something like library in terms of cost, or in terms of like, storing your content on, on Amazon, on Dropbox or whatever?
I believe the intention is for storing your content on Arweave to be more expensive than storing it on Amazon or Dropbox, because the idea is you're paying for permanent storage. This isn't something that just goes away when you're tired of it or you let your bill lapse. No, you're paying up front to get storage forever, ideally, but at least 200 years. And the problem is that when you're using, say, something else like IPFS, you're just holding on to data you want, and other people are holding on to data they want. And the miners kind of have this scenario as well, because the miners can see actually what information they're storing, and they may need to filter it for legal requirements. There are files that are not legal to have on your computer. And so there is certainly a trade-off about what risks these operators face. And so they don't just face financial costs of the electricity to run the servers, the hardware to run it, the bandwidth to serve all these files, because it doesn't cost anything to request files. And there's an interesting asymmetry there that is worth talking about. But the fundamental issue is that the node operators have a variety of issues to deal with, and the payoff may not necessarily be that large due to how consolidated the token supply was, because when it was initially launched, there were pre-sales. A lot of the current total supply is already in circulation, and the supply can't increase if people add themselves to the network and then they get paid for serving these files. And you have to serve quite a lot. The mining guide recommends having a 4 terabyte drive because that's how large the chunks of the entire index are. So it's quite a big amount of storage to maintain. Yeah, it's not huge for a data center, it's not huge for a really technical person. But to me, the biggest concern with this ecosystem fundamentally is at the base level, you have some serious challenges in how many people can really participate in the decentralization of this project rather than just consuming the service as it exists. Because there is a difference between a truly decentralized system and something that is basically just an auction for different providers to drop in, add their services, come back. I do see many utility tokens, and this Arweave is effectively a utility token that performs a purpose. There is a lot of opportunity or pitfalls for them to basically just be a open auction on various services that maybe, I would speculate a bit, big tech is more interested in than what necessarily content creators actually need.
Mm. I think you mentioned one point that I want to highlight again, because it is important. So the node operators, obviously, like just like everyone else that views the blockchain, because that's kind of the point, they can see the content that you're uploading. Right? They know what you're uploading through their node. Now, Arweave has built-in content moderation policies that can be automated. So basically, a node operator can decide, I don't know, they don't want to host certain content, even content that may not necessarily be illegal. I mean, we're not talking like, God forbid, child exploitation material, stuff like that, but like, someone who's like, expresses certain political views or certain views about like, health issues or whatever, and or I don't know, speaks against certain agendas, right? And that particular node operator said, look, now I've got different views on that. I've got different opinions on that. And I'm not going to host your content because I disagree with you. And they're perfectly it's perfectly allowed for them to do that. And it's very, very easy for them from a technical implementation level to do that. Now, another thing is obviously once a significant portion of node operators are kind of aligned on that and they say, well, we don't want to host that type of content, then effectively you have censorship, right? Because you're very limited in where you can host, and potentially you may not be able to host at all unless you start running your own node, which is obviously from a technical and resource perspective, it's a much higher barrier for entry. So I think it's a very, very important point that you've made, and I want to highlight that because the whole idea here, and that's what we're kind of trying to focus, and that's kind of the ethos of Odysee as well, is that they don't censor. And they're not only they don't censor, the entire platform is built around the concept that technically, on a technical level, at the protocol level, it is impossible to censor, right? So there is a concern here that maybe the situation is not as it seems. Now, in terms of the tokens, so I just want to like I'll just share it my screen here because I want to show people what. So the wallet that Odyssey uses for like this integration for the new monetization model is something called Wonder. Okay, it is a self custody wallet, and by self custody I mean that you do keep your your private key, right? It's not an exchange wallet, so you do have full control on that. So that's a plus in my book. I don't know how secure it is. I don't know if it's ever been security audited and stuff like that. But I want to show people what tokens it actually supports. And I guess, Gabriel, you can go through these tokens and kind of explain what they are. So let me see if I can do that. Okay.
I'll just quickly interject and
Yeah.
say that when it comes to the censorship guarantees or lack of censorship guarantees, it's very important to keep in mind that I honestly believe Odyssey is doing the best they can. I think this is a very difficult circumstance to navigate, and it is hard to really tackle the issues we care about. How do you tackle censorship in an age where there is such a high demand for narrative control? And so it's not a simple problem by any means. And so you have the tokens up here, and I'll just quickly list what they are. You've got the AR token. So the Arweave native token, that is what is used for storing the files. That is what you will pay when you need to upload a file, at least directly to Arweave itself. And then there's also the AO token, which is a bit of a broad topic on itself. We did touch on it last time we spoke together, but it's for basically building smart contracts and really just wider ecosystems on top of Arweave. Again, it is an entirely different token with an entirely different distribution and economics behind it. And that's true everything here. And so it's worth really thinking about when you engage with, say, a particular gateway or a particular Arweave DApp, however it's set up, there are some real considerations about what exact token you're using. PermaWeb, as it says here, is the index token for building a easily retrieved permanent web for storing all this stuff. Another interesting product, wrapped AR. I believe that this will be wrapped on the Ethereum blockchain, but it could, in theory, be wrapped on other blockchains as well. And Astro USD is a stable coin, so it'll represent the US dollar. You may or may not be able to claim roughly a US dollar on various exchanges for it. But stable coins are a hot topic right now because you've got the Genius bill down in the States. And so it does seem like there is kind of a new Wild West in the stablecoin space. And I think it remains to be seen where that's headed.
Yeah, and one thing that I also want to add in terms of Astro, so the stable coin, the Astro USD. So it has a built-in bridge. I haven't looked exactly how it works, but it has a built-in bridge that allows a seamless exchange between this one and the stable coins that we're all familiar with, like USDT and USDC, right? So that I think, again, there's very little information about how it will actually work in practice. So they basically launched the feature, but haven't provided a lot of information. But I think the stable coin, and that's why I'm highlighting it, will play a significant, a part in the new monetization model, because the other tokens, like their value in fiat terms, in dollar terms, can vary, obviously can vary wildly depending on what's happening in the market. So I guess that's something that I want to highlight. I mean, I don't know. Have you seen much information about how the actual monetization model is going to work?
Well, based off what went live on Odyssey already, what's available is you can use AR token now. They recently announced that on X. That's kind of what got us talking about this all. But the important thing is that we don't know what the new upcoming projects are. For instance, they've already talked about Portal. They've announced Portal. We don't really know what form exactly it takes. One can speculate that Portal is an Arweave gateway. In their own wiki and documentation, they talk about gateways, which is a way to kind of allow users onto the system without necessarily having to be one of those node operators holding on to all the files. So there are some advantages to this strategy, but there are also downsides because it doesn't make it as inherently decentralized as it otherwise could be. Now, on the other hand, there is an interesting thing that I saw in the documentation about how there's a JavaScript library. So you can create clients that are pretty decently full participants in the Arweave network. And so you can absolutely have tools on the Arweave ecosystem that at least get the most out of it. I see a lot of opportunity as far as the technology of all this together, but I do have concerns with what are the powers that gateways have, because gateways are another bottleneck that content moderation or various censorship schemes can settle in. And so when it comes to what Odysee is doing, I mean, it looks interesting, but I think there are definitely questions to ask, especially when it comes to the token distribution and what Arweave is as a crypto.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I was just kind of sharing my screen. So I've set up the wallet, so the Wonder Wallet. I guess just to explain to people. So usually crypto wallets are obviously either hard wallets or browser-based wallets. So it's like an extension that you install on your browser. And Wonder is also an extension and also a mobile app. But what they've done with the Odysee implementation is they're using something called Wonder Connect, which means you do not need to download the app and you do not need to install the connection. There is kind of like an interface within Odysee itself, within the account, and that is available to anyone that has an Odysee account, even if you don't upload videos, right? So that's what they're saying. It's not just for creators, it's for anyone who uses Odysee. You have a built-in Arweave wallet in your Odysee account now once you set it up for the first time, right? So I guess I want to show people how it looks like once you do set it up, right? And the interface is very, I mean, it's very well thought out, I have to say, from a UI perspective, and also the UX experience of how you actually set up the Wonder Wallet, which we're not going to do now. But I guess one important thing is I want to highlight, I guess, the connection or the onboarding or the on-ramp from fiat into Arweave, how it works within Odysee itself, because it does raise a few concerns straight away, straight off the bat, right? So if we go to buy, okay, so as you can see here, that's basically how you pay. So you pay with fiat, right, in order to buy. And I'm assuming, I haven't tried it, but I'm assuming once you initiate a transaction, you can choose which of the tokens that Wonder supports, which one do you want to convert it to? Or maybe it goes initially to the stable coin, which would make sense, and then you can from there convert. Not sure. But here's what I want to highlight to people. So to purchase AR on Odysee, you'll use Transec, Wonder's payment provider. Transec will prompt you to complete a KYC identity verification step before the transaction can go through. Okay? So any thoughts of anonymity, keeping your wallet address anonymous so that people don't know who this wallet belongs to? Okay, so that's the public address, obviously. That's out of the window. Now, admittedly, you don't have to go through the fiat route, right? And you don't even have to buy the tokens through the Wonder Wallet. You can go through an exchange. But from what I've seen, all the exchanges are centralized exchanges, which means those exchanges will require you to do KYC, right? So if you do not have an account with a centralized exchange, you'll need to open one, and they will demand that you do KYC. And if we go to their help document, let me see. Right. So if we go to exchanges here, they tell you which exchanges they support. Okay? So all of these, correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriel, but all of these are centralized exchanges, right?
As far as I know, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know
So
what X is. That's the one that's not familiar to me, but they pretty much all look centralized to me.
So basically, if you want to, if you need to buy any of these tokens that are supported in the Wonder Wallet in order to use whatever functionality, right? Or maybe to support creators that you want to support through the platform, right? You will need to either go to the Wonder Wallet itself and do a KYC with that what are they called? That Transac mob, which is a major operator, fully regulated. Like they have licenses in, I don't know, 12 jurisdictions. So obviously, like, I mean, they are very by the book. They will definitely demand your KYC, identity documents, probably a selfie, the whole shebang, no doubt about it. Or, right, you can buy the tokens directly through a centralized exchange. Okay. So again, if you have an account with one of these exchanges, then yeah, you're good. But if you don't and you want to, like, buy through one of those exchanges, they're all centralized, they will demand KYC.
And
So
I
that
think
is yeah.
that's really important to highlight for two reasons, because there is another way to get the token if you were interested in pseudo-anonymously acquiring it, is you could create a node for the Arweave ecosystem, mine the tokens, though you would still need to move that to your Wander wallet through the system. And even though it's not custodial, I'm not sure about the privacy guarantees of that particular wallet. Maybe there will be more Arweave open source wallets that are reasonably able to integrate with Odysee. We'll see, but the privacy guarantees are not, certainly not there. They're fundamentally, you can't expect privacy in this ecosystem. And hey, you can be like, well, what does it matter? This is all for public things. But I think when it comes to manipulating the public and propaganda, it is really important to consider what, reactions and all the people ways people support various creators. That's very useful data. If anything, that's like highly engaged data. That's very important to people trying to put their thumbs on particular scales here.
Yeah, and I think what another important thing that I guess people need to keep in mind about KYC. So KYC is not just about privacy, so basically denying you privacy. It's also the ability to enforce sanctions, right? So if you are from a country that all of a sudden they decide they don't like anymore, right? And that's the only citizenship you have, and they demand KYC, and you show them a passport of a country that they don't like. Well, they say, well, nah, see ya.
And even you as an individual, if we're concerned about how digital ID technologies can be abused, every time you use an online KYC system, whether it's for an exchange, whether it's for a normal bank account, you are adding basically to all these institutions demand for a digital ID, because let's be honest, KYC systems online are terrible. And so we should really ask ourselves why we're using these systems if they really do represent so many personal privacy risks. I mean, even recently, Coinbase had this terrible breach where their customer support reps were being bribed to hand over information of their customers. And every KYC gateway, regardless of whether it's fundamentally should be there or not, regardless of how you feel about it, it does represent a significant privacy risk in a time where these stakes really just get higher and higher.
100%. All right. So we've discussed the KYC. I guess maybe let's take a step back and highlight, the consensus mechanism and potentially some of the decentralization issues. You mentioned something about, like, who was involved, I guess, in the initial the token generation event or the ICO. There's some pretty big whales in there, pretty big operators that people will know their name, and I think it's very safe to assume, if not to guarantee, that those people or those entities are still the majority holders of the tokens, right? So, I mean, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I'll try to share my screen because I think this
There
is
you go.
looking at is I want to read it here. The Arweave held a pre-sale event in August 2017, in which 10.8% of the initially generated token supply was sold, and two public sales were completed on May 2018 and June 2018, which 7% and about 1% of the supply was sold. They go into additional detail here, but the thing I want to point out here is that it talks about how much of the supply for what is fundamentally a utility token is already out there. And why this matters is because a utility token is a token that you get for providing a service. And then by providing that service, you can in turn either sell it to people who want that service or make use of that service yourself. In this case, it's file hosting. And so the problem is you have a huge amount of what are effectively whales who have this token despite providing no actual permanent storage to anybody, or at least not inherently through those sales. And then by this, how this distorts the ecosystem is then they basically have a huge stake kind of ownership in this entire ecosystem, because as more people use it, as this becomes a bigger part of the ecosystem for storing decentralized media, what ends up happening is that as the demand for the token goes up, they have an outsized share of the profits from that. Because if you're a miner and you've been really working hard to hold on to those files to keep your infrastructure up, you're kind of a sucker compared to the guys who got the pre-sale. They got in early before, most people are even running the nodes. I believe you told me that at least 3 years ago there was a report on how there was only 173 nodes relatively distributed throughout the planet. And it's really an open question of what is the reason to participate in this decentralized ecosystem if there are guys on the take in it. Why would I set up all the infrastructure to support this ecosystem if anyone who participated in the pre-sale, anybody who really, not even started early, because it's more complicated than that. It's that there was a utility token that was given without actually doing the underlying utility. And that's a big concern. Now, maybe this is still an improvement. Maybe this is a good investment in this kind of technology. Maybe we want a permanent web that stores onto stuff in a single place and it can be retrieved forever. There are a lot of good uses for something like that, but there is a cost. And the cost, as far as I'm concerned, at least on a very basic economic level, is that the miners absolutely have already kind of been shafted because their earning potential is capped by these pre-sales inherently.
Yeah. All right. So I guess one thing that I mean, we keep talking about, like, the whales, the like, okay, let's talk about some of those they. Who are they? Right. I think it's very important.
I don't have it up on me, but there is a lot of venture capital involved with this project. For instance, a big part of this, the A16Z investment for A16Z crypto. Community Labs is a big part of it, and there's many other VC firms that built this ecosystem. That's why everything looks so polished. That's why everything's so easy to use. But the problem is that if they own this stake in it, there's an open question of what it can actually be used for. And I hate to say this, but I have a bit of a tinfoil take here where I am convinced, because retrieval from this information is free, so the miners are paying all the costs of storing and serving the content, but anybody who wants to just gobble up all this data doesn't have to pay a cent, doesn't have to pay a Satoshi, doesn't have to pay any Arweave. And so this is something that would be very useful for AI startups. You have these AI agents scooping up all this data, processing it, however. And so that means anyone who is participating in this ecosystem is creating a rich repository for AI analysis, AI surveillance. And hey, maybe that's not a big deal. But again, I think it's really worth thinking about who are the people involved with this system, and fundamentally, why are the people actually doing the work of building the actual decentralized network getting the shaft? And just there's an article I have here talking. Community Labs announced that AO Ventures, which is one of the VC funds in this space, did get funding from Faction VC and Distributed Global, as well as more. But they were also pitching projects, because the thing that I see very often in these cryptocurrency ecosystems is that they are trying to sell you a fantasy. They're trying to sell you that if you just use our thing, you're going to get super rich. You're going to become a founder. You're going to be like all those big tech CEOs that, have totally organic background stories. And so if you were participating in this program, you could pitch your business to A16Zs, to 1KX, to Coinbase Ventures. And interesting, Coinbase Ventures, I believe, comes up in Molly White's Follow the Crypto in lobbying for crypto in this particular election in the States in 2024. And so it's really important to keep in mind, what is the actual impact of participating in these ecosystems? And I'm going to sound like a super big, crypto hater from saying all this, but the fact of the matter is these systems can be decentralized. These systems can have fair launches. These things can be private. There's Monero has tips. I think it's called XMR Chat. There are lots of different decentralized ecosystems out there, and it's worth asking: is this even the right one?
Yeah, no. So a couple of things I want to add. So first of all, we the venture capital. So community, what are they called? Community
Labs, I believe.
Yeah, Community Lab. That's it. So they're not even the VC. I think they're the ones that actually created it. Like
Yes.
they are behind the Wonder Wallet, right? That's like the entity. They're running the show. Now, as far as the big VC companies, so you mentioned A16Z. So just for people who don't understand what it means, this is Arthur Andreessen, right? The VC giant that basically invested in half of Silicon Valley, right? And in Substack. Okay, so Arthur Andreessen, like obviously, like they are major players in the Trump administration, right? They're obviously a major player in crypto in general. So they have A16Z Crypto, which is a division that specializes exclusively in crypto investments, and they have a huge portfolio in that space. Uh, uh, Coinbase Ventures, I believe, is the biggest VC in crypto, full stop, right? So we are talking, I mean, when you talk about whales, it doesn't get more whales than this, right? So people need to be aware of that. I'm not necessarily saying that this is bad, but people need to understand, and we can discuss further about the tokenomics, but they hold huge amounts of all the tokens that are involved in this ecosystem, right? And obviously they can manipulate the price to suit their specific needs, and they may not even be motivated necessarily just by like maximizing profit. They may be motivated by destroying the ecosystem, by reducing its value, by reducing the number of nodes even further so that they can take control, right? So that they can easily do that by pumping or dumping, right? So that's something that people need to be aware of. Yeah, I think that's very important. Now, the other thing that you said, obviously, like this can be used to train AI. So basically, AI can go and gobble that up. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I don't know if that's different to something like YouTube, for example, where AI can just go and scoop up everything there, and the cost to do that is also negligible, if any. So I don't think that that's necessarily an issue with a decentralized file system. It's just, I guess, an issue with any open content on the internet that is not protected, right, from being gobbled up by AI. And there's ways to protect that. There's ways to employ data poisoning, right? There is a tool, I've mentioned that in another live stream. There's a tool called Nightshade that basically what it does, it injects rubbish data into images, right? That is not actually visible to the human eye, right? So the image looks exactly the same, right? But when AI scoops a lot of those images for training purposes, it starts to produce garbage, like complete nonsensical garbage, right? So basically, if you want to replicate a person, like I think the example that they gave was there was a guy there, like a journalist, that they were able to recreate images of that guy, like wearing different clothes, and that was very, very easy and looked really realistic. And then they deployed Nightshade, and basically what happened, the image that was produced, basically the guy was a cat, right? So that is something that I think it's not necessarily unique to our wave. That's just a problem that we need to discuss. But I guess from a tokenomics perspective, do you think there's anything else that is kind of worth covering for people to understand?
No, I pretty much covered it. The big thing is the fact of the matter is I believe the miners are getting the raw end of the deal here. Like I think the people using the ecosystem, it's probably going to be pretty convenient. It's probably going to work quite well. I'm actually not very bearish on that side of the equation. I just think that the biggest risk I see for this project is that the miners are not really going to be rewarded terribly handsomely. And as you say, it can be as simple as one of the VCs involved just dumps on anyone the moment the token starts to rise. And so I think that's a tragedy in its own right, because I do think this kind of thing should exist. I think it would be nice if we had a place where people can upload public content, videos we're putting out there, podcasts people are doing, creative works people want out there. There is a real use case for this kind of technology. So I'm not trying to, sound like, oh, this is a terrible idea from the foundations, because is a lot of that we should really pay attention to, and a lot we should like about what's being done.
100%. It's definitely better than having three public cloud providers that basically control the internet. There's no doubt about that. I guess the next thing I want to touch on, and that's something that I think is relevant for a lot of, especially independent media or independent journalists. And there's already, I guess, a project that is being onboarded on that. And that is something called Portal. So let me share that. All right.
As I understand it, the Independent Media Alliance has a partnership with Odysee building this portal, which is intended to be as far as I understand it, a gateway for Arweave to basically allow people to be independent creators with some really interesting tooling. They're definitely hinting that this is going to be, as they say, more than just a website builder. I really would be quite optimistic that there's a lot of interesting stuff being done here, and that could be honestly quite excellent.
Yeah, yeah. So again, the problem that I have with Odyssey, especially kind of under the new iteration, like since kind of library and I think Jeremy Kaufman, I think since they were not like no longer part of that, is they're not very transparent, right? They launch things and they don't really talk a lot about what they're actually going to do. So when they switch to I'm not going to play the video, but when they switch to this new blockchain, right, early in the year, they put a video that supposedly like explains how it's going to be, but it was done by some random influencer, didn't reveal any technical details, and basically left more questions than answers. But with regards to Portal, it is worth mentioning that, like, yeah, the Independent Media Alliance, absolutely, but they're actually taking expressions of interest publicly, right? And we're rolling out soon. Get invited to try our beta.
I did
Okay.
sign. I still haven't gotten anything, so I don't know how soon that's
I,
coming.
I haven't received anything as well. I signed up as well, and I haven't heard anything. And again, I mean, even like look, I mean, this is an expression of interest. There's literally no information, right? Portal created by the blah blah blah. Okay, cool, sounds good. Yep, that's excellent marketing speak. But no manipulation. Okay, how? No middlemen. How? Decentralized media ecosystem. How? Like how? Okay, sounds great from a marketing perspective teaser. Yeah, cool, but how? Like, right? I don't know. Maybe just me. I'm very much a kind of like a details guy, but yeah, very very light on details. So yeah, I guess take it with a grain of salt. But look, it could be interesting, definitely could be interesting. And I guess, I mean, that's a good segue to, I guess the next point I want to discuss is, okay, what do you see are the actual positives of the model that Odyssey is moving to, not just from the monetization perspective, like, how creators are monetized and like supported by the audience, but also, I guess, the underlying blockchain and how the whole ecosystem is going to work under this iteration.
Yeah, and I'll say it is a really important topic because people are hungry for a real meritocratic information environment. People are tired of algorithms just promoting whoever has, the most conventional, attractive, setup fundamentally. People want the access to real information. And the problem that happens over and over is that independent creators who actually put in the work in providing high quality content, like many of the people inside the Independent Media Alliance, I'd say all of them, but I don't know all of them fairly well. But the ones I'm familiar with, they all do excellent work. And the question is, how do you sustain that? And so the monetization side of the angle is important because people kind of underestimate that, like, hey, creators have bills. Hey, it takes work to actually research stories. You're not going to be able to put out a brand new story every single day unless you're just focusing on breaking news. There's a whole lot that really goes into this, and I'm worried that a big part of what's going on is that the AI landscape will kind of cheapen this whole ecosystem. And so really now is a great time to put your money where your mouth is. It's really a fantastic time to spend the effort to really support the people out there, because when is it going to happen? And it is hard right now because many people want to use cryptocurrency because it's at least less censored than, say, Stripe or many of these other systems out there. But the fact of the matter is, it's no panacea either. There are a lot of challenges in this space, and it's a difficult space to navigate. I'm not surprised that so many people fall into, scams and other kind of terrible scenarios just because it's not an easy ecosystem to navigate. And like you say, the lack of transparency is a real problem. The fact that we even have have to sit down here and have these chats about what are they doing. We don't know. It's like that is a problem, because if we actually want something decentralized, it does need to be bottom up. It does need to be you, the listener, or every person out there making their own decisions to build something different. And if we're just going to wait for VC capital firms to build the future for us, it's not going to represent our interests. It's going to represent their interests. And heck, you can let government step in, but government has its own incentives. So it is a very, important time in history right now to really think, what impact do we want to have on the future of the information landscape?
Couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, we're both biased being in this space, but I mean, people do need to understand that, if you are not paying for something, then you are the product, you are not the client, right? So ultimately, like, if you talk about legacy media, for example, right? You don't pay to watch the garbage, right? But why you're not paying? Because you are the product, right? You give them the eyeballs that they can sell advertising on top. They can mine your data. Like, when you watch Netflix, that, like, Netflix collects data about what you watch, your watching habit, like, your viewing habits, everything, right? So people need to understand that there's nothing free, right? If you're not supporting, first of all, if you're not supporting independent creators, then there will be less of them. And second of all, like, if you don't want to pay for that, then obviously, like, creators have to, like, monetize through other means, like, either start, like, running ads, or potentially affiliates, potentially end up in a situation where they end up with a pretty dodgy affiliate, right? Wellness company, etc. Not ideal. So people do need to keep that in mind. I guess, okay. So we've discussed the positives. Let's talk a little bit about the negatives.
Right. So, as I said, the biggest negative is that this ecosystem probably can't be that decentralized. The permanent storage aspect of this does seem to be at a very base level. There's a cap to how decentralized it can be, because the investment it takes to participate is high, the risks are high, and the rewards are kind of capped. Now, maybe this could still work out. I'm not saying that it can't succeed. I'm actually willing to be optimistic, and I'm hoping it does actually provide what it says it'll provide. But the downsides of all this is that we are basically putting all our eggs into a single basket. In this case, all our information or content on the Arweave blockchain. And there are upsides to that, but there are definitely some downsides to it. I mentioned that it could be used for AI training, and that it would be a asymmetrical deal as far as the companies who want to harvest that data would be profiting off the people eating the cost by serving the content. That's a pretty serious issue, but that's really just the tip of the iceberg. The other concern I have with this strategy is that if you build applications on top of this, say somebody builds social media on top of Arweave, if those developers are not very careful to ensure user privacy, by default, everything is stored there forever. So there will be a permanent record of, say, every interaction on this hypothetical
Mm.
media site. And so developers, but also the users who have to somehow navigate this into a whole ecosystem, have to be very concerned about the privacy impacts of all of this information. And that's the problem with a utility token like Arweave, is that it's not private. It basically never will be. Yes, there are projects that try to wrap tokens in other tokens, but that's a whole other complicated mess that's probably not very convenient for most users anyways. People will take the path of least resistance, and they will do what's familiar to them. And so what are we setting up for people by going whole hog, say, into this particular ecosystem? And I think it's a problem in the sense that many people will take decentralization to mean we don't have to worry about consolidation or putting all our eggs in one basket, when, let's be honest, there are many excellent ways to get information in a censorship resistance way. For instance, if you have a hidden service on Tor, nobody can take it down, but bandwidth is kind of limited. So you'll want to make sure you're just using text or highly compressed audio and video or images. But the fact of the matter is, there's also the Fediverse, which solves arguably a just as important problem as the monetization side, but the discovery side. If you're on the Fediverse or if you're on Noster, you can actually find creators out there, and it's not filtered through all these algorithms that decide what you see, or at least you have the opportunity to switch away from that. And so discovery arguably is just as important, if not more so, than monetization. And so there are many tools available that accomplish similar goals without the same necessarily downsides. And I think this is my biggest problem with crypto projects as a whole. I come across a bit of the crypto critic these days, because I think what really needs to be focused on is building independent digital infrastructure, not public digital infrastructure, not corporate digital infrastructure, but actually independent. Where is the hardware? How is it being run? And yes, cryptocurrency is a great system to try to incentivize it, but there are many serious concerns we have about how these systems are run and what are the risks to the people actually using it.
Here, yeah. I agree. I agree with everything you said. I guess we'll talk about the Fediverse and potentially how we can marry, potentially, I don't know, marry the two together. But I guess the concern that I have, just based on the information that we have right now, which is very, very limited. So basically, they launched this like major feature with basically no information, like nothing, like how the monetization actually going to work, like how that's all going to be, like, okay, what do you then do with the tokens that you accumulate in your Wonder Wallet, your Wonder Connect, right? So my main concern is just looking at a very, very recent past, that this can end up like something like Rockfin, right? So Rockfin was a very promising platform. They had their own token that was basically used for all the monetization, all the functionality, supporting creators, all that sort of stuff. But you get paid in Rockfin. So like, like any other talk, it's monopoly money, right? So you can't like pay your bills with Rockfin, just like you can't pay your bills with Arweave token, right? So and even with a stable coin, right? I mean, even if you like get paid in that native stable coin that they have, you still need to like somehow at the very, very least, right? Convert it to like the more, I guess, mainstream stable coins like USDC and USDT. And if that off ramp is kind of blocked or is not viable, right? Then what are you going to do? So that's one thing. The other thing is the value of the token, if it's not a stable coin, can like fluctuate rapidly, especially in an environment where like a significant portion is held by whales, which whose interests may not necessarily align with creators, right? They may want to pump just to make money, and then storage becomes very, very expensive. Or they may dump because they want to destroy, like, they want to destroy the ecosystem because all of a sudden there's too many, like, bloody anti-vaxxers on the network, right? Or Nazis, right? I mean, whatever. Yeah, that's kind of the concern that I have. And Rockfin, I mean, the situation there is pretty bad. I mean, they basically pulled they did a rug pull on all the creators there, and then they changed the model where basically you can't upload, I think, free content, so it has to be only premium content, and obviously the value of the token itself is essentially zero. So you may get paid 1 million Rockfin tokens, but the value, like the price per token is still zero, very close to it. So what do you actually have, right? So that's I guess, yeah, remains to be seen. If we had more information about how, like, they're actually going to do that, and I looked through the very, very limited help document that they published about monetization, and there's no information there basically what, like, how it's actually going to work. Okay, well, you're going to pay for memberships, you're going to pay for tips with that thing, but how, what, like, will you be able to choose what token? Will you be able to ensure that you only pay creators with a stable coin so they don't have to worry about the fluctuation in the value? Who knows? Remains to be seen. But one thing that you touched on, and I do, like, want to expand on, is obviously this new model that Odysee has and the Fediverse, right? So the Fediverse is a very mature project. I mean, the two protocols that underpin it are ActivityPub and Nostr, have been around for, I don't know, 15 years, whatever. And recently, especially ActivityPub has gained a lot of prominence because Ghost, right, the publishing platform Ghost, they've already implemented ActivityPub integration for their hosted version, if you host with Ghost. But version 6 of Ghost, which is going to be released next month in July, will have that available to people who self-host, right? So my thought, and again, that is just something that I'm kind of like contemplating, like out loud, is, okay, well, can you use something like Arweave to host a Ghost site, or a PeerTube instance, like the video hosting, or PixelFed, which is like the Fediverse version of Instagram, right? So, I mean, I don't know. What do you think?
So there's a couple of different moving parts there that I'll try to kind of lay out so people can follow. Is that the Fediverse or Nostr are various decentralized social media platforms. They don't necessarily strictly address monetization. Nostr has Zaps over the Bitcoin's Lightning Network. You can do all kinds of things over the Fediverse. For instance, I talked to the developer of Mitra, which is a Fediverse server that supports Monero payments. And this is the thing where these systems are things you will host yourself. You, your organization, your community will run a server, pay the costs of running and maintaining it, but it's yours. You can control how it's run. You can protect yourself from censorship by using various censorship circumvention technologies like Tor. There are many different ways in which you can kind of seize territory in cyberspace and really take part in shaping it. Whereas the problem with some of these cryptocurrency type ventures is you are giving up some sovereignty by depending on, let's just say, open bid infrastructure by all these providers who want to sign up as miners. If there's a high barrier of entry, you have to think about what incentives they're playing. If you have to have a corporation and huge amounts of investment to really even interact with this system, how many small independent operators are there going to be really? And I think that's a serious question to ask. This is why many people in the cryptocurrency space are very concerned about how many nodes there are, where they are in, the physical locations. Can they all be shut down all at once? If there's a power outage in a country or a continent, all these things don't matter. Whereas if you run your own digital infrastructure, you have complete control. You can take open source software, make your own modifications. Maybe you want the social media aspect of the Fediverse or PeerTube or many different systems that are out there, but you just want to use Arweave as what it fundamentally is, which is a storage layer. And
Mm.
it takes time and it takes effort. Like, this isn't something that's supported out of the box. But what I, really the drum I try to beat when my work at the Libre Solutions Network is that we need to start thinking of these possibilities. We need to start thinking about what can be done and how we want to support making it happen, rather than just simply letting VCs fund the new direction that we're all kind of funneled into because, oh, that's the easiest thing. Oh, that's what kind of just works for now. And then suddenly a few years from now, we're like, oh no, everything's different. Why do I have to move again? Why, do all these things change? And it's because if you have your own independent digital infrastructure as an individual, as a family, as a community, as even a network of people online, there are so many advantages to that transcend just a specific system. And that's what I want to really awaken people to, is that there is so much opportunity. These systems still allow us to have some freedom that we should try to use as best as we can while we still can.
Here. Yeah, look, I agree with what you're saying. I guess to play devil's advocate and to bring it from the other side. So, to have your own digital infrastructure, especially if you're an individual creator or you're just like a very small group of people, or you're in a developing country or stuff like that, there is also a significant entry barrier to that, because there is fairly significant upfront costs and there's also ongoing costs. Now, with Arweave, the one thing that is kind of cool about them is because it's a permanent storage solution, right? The initial cost to upload new information to Arweave is higher than what it would be on something like Amazon or Dropbox, but it's a one-off cost. So
Right.
you only pay for uploads. The hosting is free. So on months that you don't upload anything, you do not pay, right? So you don't pay for bandwidth, right? In that sense, and that's I mean, that is something that may be appealing. Then again, obviously on the flip side, if you can't get any of the node operators, right, to host your content, right, or a significant majority to not host your content, and then you're kind of forced to either look for other solutions or start your own node, then we're back to square one. So yeah, that is kind of like the consideration that people need to think about. And I mean, I don't know. Again, we don't have this information, but maybe Odysee directly will offer their own nodes, which they guarantee that they will host any content that they currently allowed to host on Odysee, right? So this is something that Odysee can be very, very smart about. If they create their own node, or one, they're probably going to need more than one node. So they're going to operate some nodes directly, and those will be kind of like the nodes of last resort. So if you can't get other nodes to host your content, Odyssey will host it subject to the content being within their guidelines, which are very, very broad.
It's a fair
Again,
point.
we don't have this information.
The lines are very blurry. It really doesn't have to be one or the other. We can experiment with these systems. And I think it is important to explore the possibilities really on both sides of the fence because I'm pretty harsh on cryptocurrency projects, but I'm not anti crypto by any means.
So Gabriel, what's your verdict? I mean, based on the information we have, which admittedly is very, very limited, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with the inside deliberations within the Independent Media Alliance and why they decided to go with Odysee and what negotiations they had with Odysee. So maybe they were given more information. But as far as the information that is available to us, plebs, the general public, it's very, very, very scarce. There's not a lot to work with. So for me, that's always a concern. But I mean, I don't know. What's your take?
I will say I will side on the side of optimism for the short term. I actually think there's a lot of potential. It might even inspire a lot of new people to really figure out how to create content, and maybe that'll inspire them to think about how they can do censorship resistance on their own. I think there is a lot of good that can come from even just trying, even if we know it may or may not pan out. I do think it is important that we try these things. And I think it's just that we figure out how we want to set our boundaries with it. Maybe don't sign up on this platform with your real name because it's permanent. Maybe not, try to
Mm.
change and really think about what information you're putting on this, how you're interacting with it. Like, be aware, but by all means, don't be afraid. Like, I think we can interact with these systems for what they are. What we really, as we understand it, Arweave is a attempt at a decentralized permanent file storage that has some, ownership and different incentives involved. And as long as we're aware of those incentives, we can still make use of it for what it is. And like you point out, there are opportunities with people to run gateways that may be more independent. And maybe that's all it takes to really make this system at least worth interacting with. And the fact of the matter is, one of the reasons why I would lean towards let's wait and see, let's try it out, let's not write it off completely, fundamentally is that the situation is quite dire right now. You have YouTube, you have all these major centralized ecosystems, whether it's X, whether it's Substack. Just because they're more permissive about free speech now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that will always be the case. And one thing we saw, like you pointed out in 2020 and 2021, is that in critical junctures, they will make changes that people don't necessarily see coming. They will change on a dime, and things that you never thought would go along with it absolutely will. And so be mindful, be aware, but don't be afraid. I think it's worth interacting with these things with a healthy amount of skepticism and optimism to at least, one of the things I love the most about these kinds of systems is as you see it play out, you can get ideas on how we might want to approach something in the future. Even if this doesn't succeed, we can still learn valuable information about how a decentralized file storage system works. And that itself is valuable, even if the system fundamentally doesn't necessarily do what we want it to.
I wanted to ask you, Gabriel, you've done quite a lot of work in obviously setting up your own kind of digital infrastructure. And I don't know if you've looked at the hardware requirements to set up a node on Arweave, but I mean, just in terms of kind of a rough estimate of costs, like if I want to operate an Arweave node tomorrow, right, in order to have the most basic setup in order to meet their requirements, what sort of financial investment am I looking at?
I mean, that's something that varies a lot. You could probably buy local used hardware and get started relatively inexpensively. I would say your biggest expense will be maintaining it across time. Like, you could probably get a very inexpensive setup day one, but then over the next couple of months, keeping things running, if you're going to be making money off serving files, you're going to want an interesting RAID setup, which means more money on hard drives. That means hard drives fail over time. I would expect it to be a very expensive proposition in the long run, and contrasted against what you get out of it. But I mean, I would love to see people try it out and report on it, because a few things I've looked around, I haven't seen too many people giving hard numbers on like, hey, I did this. This is how much I got. And truthfully, a lot of that's subject to change. The token itself is a asset that can change in price pretty quickly. So just because it's worth it one week, maybe it's not worth it the next week. And that can be a problem and a weak point where, oh, the token crashes, so everybody shuts down their nodes and then it's dead forever. That could happen.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I guess the one thing that I look at, kind of like, how we've decided how much they're going to charge for an upload, like, the network is a blockchain, and the way they do that is like they estimate the cost of hosting the content over 200 years, with with, I think, the assumption that the hardware costs or the storage costs go down by 30% every year, something along those lines, which means because they only charge once, right? They don't charge for ongoing hosting. So the initial, like, upload is significantly more expensive than, like, what you would have in a centralized cloud, but then you don't pay again. So I guess maybe, like, if you start a node, you can recoup your investment quicker than if you were doing through another model. But yeah, look, I mean, it'll be good to have more details. I agree with you that we should definitely, like, keep an open mind and give it a try once it's released. I mean, I've signed up for the like, the beta test of Portal. I'm definitely, like, if I do get access, I'm definitely going to play around with it, because this is kind of what I do. I want to see if this model can actually work. But at this stage, I think from my perspective, we do not yet have enough information to basically say, okay, well, this is good, or this is not good, or this is a problem, or this is not a problem. And unfortunately, it is a recurring theme with Odysee, since they've kind of, migrated off library, and I think they have a new management, a new corporate entity, I think incorporated in Delaware or whatever. uh, um, they're very good with marketing, right? It's all very slick marketing, and they're creating a lot of hype. But when you actually ask them details, and I mean, I even respond to, like, their posts on Twitter. Okay, well, but how? Like, how is it actually going to work? And all will be revealed in due course. Okay, well, that doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence. I guess we have one question here from James. This is actually a good question, because I didn't think about it. So, where is the intellectual property rights held? Like, if you upload, right, is it based on the node operator, on where Arweave is incorporate? Like, who
That
has the property rights?
That's a really interesting question, though, because that has a lot to do with probably AI copyright law that's going on right now. Right now, they're trying to decide if something is fair use if they take it and then train a model off it and use those inputs to do all kinds of things. And the thing is it's possible that with certain gateways, such as maybe Portal, Odyssey, or various other ones that may exist in the future, those could have certain terms by uploading through them, not necessarily Arweave directly,
Mm.
and run an Arweave node. And I'm sure you can throw your own information on there and still, in theory, retain copyright. But I'll say copyright is two things: it's the law and what's actually enforced. And so that'll depend by jurisdiction. But I'll also say there's a really strong incentive for the people involved in this to want to maybe not necessarily take your copyright, but change what terms it can be used. Maybe if you're somebody who doesn't necessarily want your stuff to be proactively scanned by AI and you're in a jurisdiction that limits what rights are given just because something's public, you may not want to engage with this system on the basis of copyright alone. But like you say, it's an open question. We have no idea what Portal is going to be like. There's really no information on that. At least Odyssey is currently up. We can at least upload to that, and I believe you still own your copyright and give them a license to distribute your content. But it's a blockchain. It's kind of the Wild West. Somebody can just grab that and do what they want with it, and that's kind of what you do when you distribute something so publicly.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, the main point, I guess, that I think is worth considering is, okay, well, if someone pirates your content, right, and re-uploads as theirs, right, and, like, the whole DMCA process, right, to have the content removed, how is that going to work? I can tell you how it works in Odysee right now, because I have a personal experience with that. So when the documentary about Benjamin Netanyahu was released, right, the BB files, so that was all over Twitter, right? Everyone uploaded the file, which was obviously copyrighted, but I didn't realize that. So I grabbed it from Twitter and I tried to upload it on both my Rumble channel and my Odysee channel. So here's what happened. Rumble just removed it. No notice, no strike, no nothing. They just, boom, gone. Poof, right? Odysee sent me an email saying, oh, we detected copyrighted material on your channel. You have 24 hours to remove that. Otherwise, the entire channel will be deleted. So we're not going to delete it, right? But if you don't delete it within the next 24 hours of receipt of this email, we're going to nuke your channel, right? So that's how it works in Odysee right now. How is it going to work in the new setup? Who knows, right? So that's yeah, that's something, kind of something to keep in mind. All right. I think that's, I mean, I don't know, is there anything else that you think worth mentioning in this context before we see if we have any questions?
I would just say that the cost of hosting your own infrastructure, while it is a bit of an upfront thing, it is a in time investment, if nothing else. As somebody who's been doing this, I know it takes a lot of time. It is getting easier over time. The bandwidth is relatively inexpensive and storage is getting cheaper. And so, if you want to do something like this on your own, now is a good opportunity to start experimenting and doing what you can, because there are many decentralized protocols out there. You may not want to put all your eggs in one basket. You may, even if you love Arweave and systems they build on top of it, maybe you'll still want to try to do other things at the same time, because you'll want to try out what other things that are out there. And I will say, as somebody who does publish a good amount of content over RSS and other decentralized systems, it's actually kind of fascinating how many people will actually engage. Yeah, I have no idea how many. The only way I kind of have a hint is that I get an email once in a while saying, "Hey, I was listening to this, whatever." But it is real. And there are a lot of people who actually do care about the free and open web. And it is worth spending the time to figure out how you want to make your mark on it, because I think it is inevitable that we will make some kind of mark on the future of the web. It's just really worth thinking about how exactly we want to do that.
Yeah, and how people can still maintain, I guess, their anonymity and still be able to speak. So yeah, remains to be seen. So I guess, I don't know. I mean, I think, would you agree that our kind of like, conclusion is, look, it could work, but there's like, there's TBC. Basically, there's some crucial information that is missing. There are some red flags about like, potentially like huge, massive whales with interests that definitely do not align with like, freedom and free speech and the open web, that are definitely part of it. That's a fact. But maybe that by itself is not necessarily like a deal breaker. I mean, would that be a kind of like a good conclusion for us to end this with?
I would agree. I mean, it is worth pointing out the systems we have aren't perfect. If somebody's migrating from Facebook to this, hey, maybe there are some serious advantages. And I don't think it's a good idea to necessarily bash every new decentralized attempt just because it has flaws, because I promise you, every single one of them is going to have some flaw or another. But it is absolutely worth being aware of them, being serious about them. And that's where I personally think it's really important to separate. For instance, I'm sure you've heard, people throw around black pill around, just because you're taking a serious look at the problems in something or some initiative, that doesn't mean you hate it. That doesn't mean you're not willing to give it a shot and you're not willing to at least see how it goes. You really should take a look at even the things you love with open eyes and a sober amount of skepticism, just to keep yourself grounded. Hype itself is kind of an enemy of real meaningful change.
Here. And look, yeah, I mean, what I would also add to that, hey, keep local backups of everything all the time,
Good.
including your email list regularly. That's all I will say, because ultimately, decentralized, not decentralized, what you have in your hand in like, holding physically, ideally on multiple hard drives, nothing beats that. All right. So before I guess we end, I just want to see quickly if we have any questions. That's probably a good time for people to ask questions if they want us to address anything specific. I'm just going to go through quickly through all the chats and the streams and see if people want to raise something.
Well, I thank anybody who has been watching us so far. I mean, it is nice that some people decided to watch us. It means a great deal to me. I know these conversations can not be as sexy as many of the other ones out there. So, hey, thank you for listening. Attention
Yeah.
span is at a premium these days, so it is a big investment.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I guess what I would say, and I mean, I don't see any more questions. So I think we can end it on look, it looks interesting. More information is needed. I'm going to play with it once, like, definitely I'm going to play with Portal once more information is released and see how it actually works. I'm sure you'll be doing the same. Yeah, I guess we'll report our findings once we have something more concrete. But yeah, this is kind of like a heads up. Keep an eye. This could be a major, like, turning point for Odysee and in general for like, independent publishing on the web and monetizing that publishing, or it could be a flop, could be another Rockfin. Who knows? Nobody really knows. Yeah, so I think that's probably a good way to end this. As you said, I really appreciate everyone tuning in live, giving us your attention, and hopefully you found it valuable. Thank you, Gabriel, for coming on board. I know it's Friday night for you, so I really appreciate that that you come at this time. And yeah, thank you everyone, and we'll chat again soon.